In 1933, a struggling German writer received a telegram that would change his life forever. The message offered him 1,000 Reichsmarks a month, a fortune for a man who could barely afford rent. There was just one condition. He had to present himself at number 7 Prince Albrechtstrasse in Berlin. When Otto Rahn arrived at that address, he discovered it was SS headquarters. The man who'd sent the telegram was Heinrich Himmler, head of Hitler's paramilitary organization and soon to become one of the most powerful figures in Nazi Germany. Himmler had read Rahn's book about the Holy Grail. He believed every word, and now he wanted Rahn to find it for the Third Reich. What happened next was stranger than fiction. An openly gay, liberal-leaning historian became Hitler's personal grail hunter, traveling across Europe in search of a cup that supposedly held Christ's blood. The Nazis weren't just building an empire, they were chasing medieval legends, convinced that ancient relics could grant them supernatural power. This is the story of Otto Rahn, the man who inspired Indiana Jones and the Third Reich's terrifying obsession with the occult. Otto Rahn was born in 1904 in Michelstadt, a small town in Germany's Odenwald region. The area was steeped in medieval legends, and young Rahn absorbed them like a sponge. While other children played with toys, he read epic poems about knights and dragons. At university, Rahn studied philology, the history of language and literature, but his real passion was medieval Germany. He became obsessed with a 13th century poem called Parzival, which told the story of a knight's quest for the Holy Grail. Most scholars treated Parzival as pure fiction. Rahn saw something different. He believed the poem contained real clues, hidden in plain sight for centuries. His breakthrough came when he learned about the Cathars. This Christian sect had flourished in southern France during the 12th and 13th centuries. The Cathars rejected the Catholic Church's wealth and corruption. They believed the material world was evil, and only the spiritual realm was pure. The Catholic Church labeled them heretics. In 1209, Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade to wipe them out. The campaign was brutal. Thousands of Cathars were massacred. Their strongholds were destroyed. By 1244, the sect had been virtually eliminated, but legends persisted. According to local folklore, the Cathars had possessed a great treasure. Some said it was gold. Others whispered it was something far more valuable, the Holy Grail itself. Rahn became convinced the legends were true. He spent months studying Parzival, comparing the poem's descriptions to real locations in southern France. One place kept appearing in his research, Montségur Castle, perched high in the Pyrenees Mountains. In 1931, Rahn traveled to Montségur. The ruined fortress sat atop a steep mountain, its walls still scarred from the final siege. This was where the last Cathars had made their stand. On March 16, 1244, after a brutal 9-month siege, the survivors surrendered. Over 200 Cathars were burned alive at the base of the mountain. But according to legend, 4 knights had escaped the night before the surrender. They'd climbed down the sheer cliffs in darkness, carrying the Cathars' sacred treasure. Rahn explored every inch of Montségur. He discovered hidden tunnels beneath the castle. He found chambers carved into the rock. He interviewed local villagers who still remembered old stories passed down through generations. He didn't find the Grail, but he found enough to convince himself it had been there. In 1933, he published his findings in a book called Crusade Against the Grail. The book caught fire in Germany. Readers were captivated by Rahn's theory that the Grail wasn't just a legend, it was real, and it had been hidden by a persecuted Christian sect that rejected Rome's authority. One reader was particularly interested. Heinrich Himmler saw in Rahn's work something that aligned perfectly with Nazi ideology. The Cathars had been outsiders, persecuted by the establishment. They'd possessed ancient wisdom that the corrupt church wanted destroyed. Himmler believed the Aryans had similar ancient knowledge, suppressed by centuries of Christian influence. If Rahn could find the Grail, it would prove the Nazis were right about everything. That's when the telegram arrived. Rahn had no choice. He was broke, unemployed, and living in a Germany where opportunities were vanishing. When he arrived at SS headquarters, Himmler made his offer clear: unlimited funding for Grail research in exchange for loyalty to the Reich. "A man has to eat," Rahn told a shocked friend later. What was I supposed to do? Turn Himmler down? But Rahn was a terrible fit for the SS. He was openly gay in an organization that sent homosexuals to concentration camps. He was liberal-minded in a party built on authoritarianism. He wasn't even particularly anti-Semitic, though some evidence suggests he may have had Jewish ancestry himself. None of that mattered to Himmler. The head of the SS was obsessed with the occult. He believed ancient relics held real power, power that could help the Nazis win the war they were planning. Hitler's inner circle shared this obsession. They weren't just building a political movement. They were attempting to resurrect what they saw as Germany's pagan past, before Christianity had supposedly corrupted the Aryan race. The Nazis created entire departments dedicated to finding magical artifacts. They sent expeditions to Tibet searching for proof of Aryan origins. They studied ancient runes and symbols. They held ceremonies at midnight in castle halls, trying to channel mystical energy. Himmler was the driving force behind much of this. He'd even renovated Wilhelmsburg Castle in Westphalia, turning it into an SS order castle, a kind of occult headquarters. The castle's north tower featured a room with a 12-armed sun wheel inlaid on the floor, representing what Himmler called the Black Sun. This wasn't just symbolism. Himmler genuinely believed these rituals and symbols could tap into supernatural forces, and he was convinced the Holy Grail was the ultimate power object. So Rahn traveled. He went back to France exploring more Cathar sites. He visited Italy, Iceland, and remote corners of Germany. Himmler gave him everything he needed: money, assistance, access to restricted archives. In 1936, Himmler forced Rahn to join the SS officially. Rahn became a non-commissioned officer, wearing the black uniform he despised. When a friend saw him in it, Rahn looked miserable to keep the money flowing. Rahn wrote a second book in 1937, Lucifer's Court. It was a strange, rambling work that used poetic allegory to describe his continued search. Some historians believe Rahn was trying to critique Nazism through metaphor, hiding his true feelings in symbolic language. If that was his intent, the Nazis missed it entirely. Himmler loved the book. He ordered 5,000 copies printed on expensive leather and distributed them to Nazi leadership. Even Hitler received a copy. But when Rahn saw the published version, his blood ran cold. His editors had inserted anti-Semitic passages he'd never written. They'd twisted his words to fit Nazi propaganda. Rahn was trapped. He still hadn't found the Grail. Himmler's patience was wearing thin, and Rahn's personal life was becoming dangerous. In 1937, Rahn got drunk at a party and was caught with another man. In any other circumstance, this would have meant immediate arrest and deportation to a concentration camp. But Himmler still needed him. The punishment was different. Rahn was ordered to serve as a guard at Dachau concentration camp for 3 months. What Rahn witnessed there destroyed him. He saw the systematic brutality, the dehumanization, the casual cruelty of the SS guards. These were his colleagues now. This was the organization he'd joined. When his guard duty ended, Rahn knew he couldn't continue. He'd sold his soul for the Grail, and he hadn't even found it. In February 1939, Otto Rahn wrote a letter to Heinrich Himmler. It was his resignation from the SS. Himmler accepted it. But in Nazi Germany, you didn't just quit the SS and walk away. The Gestapo began watching Rahn immediately. Rahn told friends he was in danger. "I have much sorrow in my country," he said. "Impossible for a tolerant, liberal man like me to live in a nation that my native country has become." He knew what happened to people who left the SS. They disappeared, they had accidents, or they were given the option of suicide. Kill yourself, or we'll do it for you and make your family suffer. On March 13, 1939, hikers found Otto Rahn's body in the Tyrolean Alps. He was frozen in the snow, dead from exposure. The official cause of death was suicide. Rahn was 35 years old. Some details of his death remain suspicious. The location was one of his favorite hiking spots. He'd written about the area in his books. But the timing was significant. March 13th was exactly 695 years after the Cathar's final surrender at Montségur. Some believe Rahn chose the date deliberately, one final connection to the people he'd spent his life studying. Others claim he faked his death and escaped to South America, or continued searching for the Grail in secret. But no evidence supports these theories. The most likely explanation is the simplest. The SS gave Rahn a choice, and he chose to die on his own terms, rather than in a camp. Rahn never found the Holy Grail. But his story reveals something darker about the Third Reich. The Nazis weren't just political extremists. They were true believers in a twisted mythology that mixed racism, paganism, and occult fantasy. They genuinely thought ancient relics could grant them power. They sent scholars like Rahn across Europe chasing legends. They wasted resources on mystical expeditions while planning genocide. Rahn's tragedy was that he let ambition blind him to reality. He knew the Nazis were evil. He saw it firsthand at Dachau. But by then, it was too late. He'd already made his deal with the devil. Today, Rahn is largely forgotten, but his influence lives on. His books inspired countless Grail hunters who still search the Pyrenees, and his story became the template for Indiana Jones, the archaeologist who battles Nazis searching for supernatural artifacts. The difference is that Indiana Jones was the hero. Otto Rahn was the cautionary tale, the scholar who collaborated with monsters and paid the ultimate price. The Holy Grail remains lost, but Otto Rahn's story reminds us that some quests demand too high a price, He traded his principles for funding. He joined monsters to chase legends. And when he finally saw the truth, escape was impossible. The Nazis' occult obsession wasn't harmless fantasy. It was part of their machinery of death, a twisted mythology that justified genocide while chasing fairy tales. Rahn died alone in the snow, frozen between two worlds. He never belonged with the SS, but he'd made his choice. Some treasures aren't worth